Good evening and welcome to this session with our, I think, celebrity at this Lit Fest, Shehan Karunatilaka, who, as was just mentioned, is the Booker Prize winner this year for The Seven Moons of Maali, Almeida. Shehan arguably is already familiar to a lot of readers in India, book consumers in India and Kerala particularly, for his work Chinaman, which was the book I think which made him noteworthy and brought him to our attention. And he's followed that up, of course. He had a series of short stories, he's written children's books, some of which is not so as well known as, some of his well-known works. But The Seven Moons of Maali, Almeida, which I've just completed reading a few days back, is indeed, so much has been written about the book, spoken about the book. We had another session with Jerry Pinto with him about the book itself. But I think it bears repetition that it is a trailblazing work in terms of not only the stylistics, in terms of how he captures a particular segment of recent tortuous, difficult history in Sri Lanka, and how he abstracts it, in inverted commas, into a more enduring kind of reflective piece, which is dark satire, which is dark comedy. It is, if you like, a carnival stood on its head. It is Fellini's, as I was telling him, in terms of cinematic. It's been compared to some of the greatest writings in the world, some of the greatest innovative works in the world. And so we are not going to be speaking about the book per se, partly because we've already done that in another session with Jerry Pinto, partly because I suspect Shehan is now going through a fatigue process in terms of talking about his book. This must be, I don't know, the end Lit Fest he's attending. He was already there in Bangalore earlier, and where I was there, and he's got a lot more to go. But so it's not so much the book as per se that we are going to discuss. But of course, the book will come into the picture, this and his other works, when we discuss the theme that's been given to us, which is metaphor, imagination, and truth. And how do these categories, these concepts, these ideas, factor in the work of a creative artist in the process of her or his expression. If I might begin, Shehan, by of course congratulating you on the book and saying what a trailblazing work this is, because it's difficult to place it. Sometimes there are people who insist on categories. What is this book about? Is it surreal? Is it allegorical? Is it postmodernist? Is it this? Is it that? And what's wonderful about this book is it is a mix. It's a kind of madness that infects the imagination in a positive sense and takes us to new realms of imagination. So we really don't need to discuss what imagination means. You know it intuitively, you've practiced it, and the product of that imagination, the process of that imagination is really the Seven Moons of Maali. An aspect, one can also see that in Chinaman earlier. So what in your experience, ideatically in terms of your actual experience of going through creative expression, is the role of imagination? Is imagination something that you pull out of thin air and one fine day it takes hold of you and it lets you write an entire book? Is that how it happens? Or what is the kind of your encounter with imagination? How has it been?
I wish it was that simple and it just appears from the sky and you type 6 months later. Speaking of fatigue, firstly, thank you for coming out on this sleepy, hot last day of the session. Fatigue has been setting in, but I can't afford to because there's a long way for me to go talking about this. But, I don't tire about talking about it. The thing is, I think for me the metaphor comes first, before the subtext, before the politics. Like, if you take the first book, Chinaman, for example, now it's seen as using cricket to talk about Sri Lanka. And I suppose that's true, but when I set out to do it, I'm not thinking in those terms of, okay, I want to talk about Sri Lanka, what's the best way? Okay, let me use cricket or let me use a ghost story. I'm usually attracted to it's either image or concept. So in this case, let's start with the first book. I thought, is it possible? Because I was, thinking about writing in the early 2000s, and Sri Lankan books, they were very familiar themes. You have the war, the ethnic conflict. Usually it's a Sinhala boy, Tamil girl, kind of love story, that sort of thing. And always the war is in inescapable background. And I thought, is it possible to write a book about Sri Lanka during the war years that didn't mention the war? That was my brief. And because I remember, we all remember 1996, amidst, in the throes of the war, Sri Lanka won a World Cup. And this was, the great underdog story. And I thought, is it possible to do this? And so the idea that the greatest cricketer of all time played for Sri Lanka in the 80s, and therefore nobody noticed him because nobody cared about Sri Lanka in the 80s playing cricket. And to follow these two men who, while the war is going on, they decide, there's nothing we can do about the war, so let's just watch cricket and drink arak and enjoy this. And that's really all I thought, okay, this is an interesting story, and I'd like someone to do it. Always, you come up with the idea, you think someone should do it, and then you realize no one is going to do it, and you end up attempting it. But it's only later when I started writing it, and I was writing about Pradeep Mathew, the great left-arm spinner. So I spent a lot of time researching different deliveries, the arm ball, the double bounce ball, all that, and I got kind of bogged down into the minutiae of Pradeep Mathew. And then when I gave it to my first readers, I was saying, what do you think of Pradeep Mathew? Isn't he really cool? And they were like, well, he's okay, but we are more interested in the drunk journalist who's telling the story. Yeah. Which took me, I took me aback. I thought I failed here. And then you ask yourself, I think 2-3 drafts down the track, what is the story really about? And I realized, okay, it's not just about a left-arm spinner and a drunk. It's about wasted genius, wasted potential. This great cricketer who, and we have it in every sport. We have cricketers who, or sports people who are talented but never make it. But also I'm talking about W.G. Karunatilaka, the journalist, this great writer who is drinking himself to death. But also I'm talking about Sri Lanka, this beautiful paradise isle blessed with resources that goes from catastrophe to catastrophe. But I think all that stuff comes later. It's only, but you start with the image, and it's the same with this imagination. I just thought a ghost story where the dead could speak, the victims of Sri Lanka's wars, because we don't get their story. We get the story of the victors and the vanquished, but the victims, the innocent victims, they don't have a voice. So I think imagination means you find a concept that you want to apply your imagination to. Later the meaning becomes apparent, but it's not the other way around where you sit. So with my short stories, perhaps you set out and say, I want to write a story about housemaids in the Middle East, and you do it. I've only done that on a few occasions. Most of the stories come from an image or idea that you want to explore in your imagination.
Right. And there's a lot there in the book. There's a lot there. It's not only that kind of creative madness infects the imagination, but it also is alluding to, as you said, a very, very difficult, turbulent, uncontainable kind of events that Sri Lanka went through the last 2.5 decades, since the 1983, say, the anti-Tamil pogrom to begin with, and then the excesses on the Tamil side, the LTT, the fascism that followed, the killings, then the JVP, the Janata Vigupta Peramana, which was a kind of leftist, extremist, Maoist kind of insurgency. Then the Indian, we call it Indian peacekeeping force. There are people in Sri Lanka who see it as an occupying force, however short-lived it was. And all of these happening in, backed into 2.5 decades, which people in Sri Lanka had to live through. Some of them were victims of it, many of them were the receiving end of it. And such a beautiful, peaceful, this is the contrast, Serendip, the beautiful island called Sri Lanka, that this was in store for Sri Lanka. And all of that comes into the 7 moons of Maali Almeida in various points of time. And that's quite an achievement. So, you followed these events. Were you directly in touch with some of these? Have you directly? Is this book a kind of catharsis in that sense? In terms of your own mental catharsis or even your interaction viscerally looking at what's happening there? Or is it something that you distance yourself from and you need to record, you need to creatively express in the absence or as a substitute for what might call a truth and reconciliation effort, which many people said should have followed all the difficult situations that Sri Lanka passed through. I was just curious to know how you went about this, why and how you went about this.
Yeah, so we didn't have much truth or reconciliation, not much reconciliation certainly. Truth also now, we live in the post-truth area. Truth is more your department than mine, I suppose. But for me, 89, I remember I was a teenager at the time. 83, I was a child. And we knew that bad stuff was going on, but I was typically indifferent. And also I was living in Colombo. Yes. Colombo is, even today, the Colombo bubble exists. The country is going through economic collapse and facing tough times, but Colombo, certain segments, pretend like things are okay and it's happening in some other country. And I wasn't all I could, I remember from going to school and seeing bodies hanging on tires and not knowing who they were. Are these soldiers? Are these JBPers? Are these suspected LTTers? And it could have been anyone and anyone could have killed them. And I won't say catharsis because we lived in denial, and then my family migrated and it's only much later that when I came up with this idea of letting the dead speak. This period, the other thing about Sri Lanka is we forget very easily. 89 it's my lifetime, 30, 40 years, but it seems like ancient history. And the Easter attacks of 2019, 3 years ago, again, not many people are talking about that anymore, even though there was a lot of narratives, a lot of conspiracies around it. And it bothered me that there is a whole generation that knew that there was a war going on. A war happened before the war, but not aware of what happened, and neither was I. And so when I went back to researching, and I felt like this was a safe enough time had passed that I could research this. And as I met contemporaries who grew up in Jaffna, in Trincomalee, like my wife's family was in the plantations during the jail and had a much more harrowing experience than me. And so for me, I think it was more my guilt of having lived in the Colombo bubble and had been got through relatively unscathed. And but realizing, there are a lot of Sri Lankans who still believe, okay, these are bygones, why bring this stuff up? You're just dredging up the past, you want this, won't start, then just leave it, it's done. And this is very convenient. If you have the privilege of you weren't affected and you can forget, that's fine, but there are significant numbers of Sri Lankans for whom those wounds have not healed and perhaps will never heal and are not addressed. And so this was my way of trying to make sense of it and actually try to come up with some sort of coherent narrative, why these things happen, why they keep recurring. And so I did a lot of research, it's well documented, and as you know, I think another tragedy, you were there covering this, of the early 90s is that after this, a whole generation of leaders were wiped out. That generation, Apulaatmaka Dissanayaka, Premadasa, and which is why perhaps we are left with the dregs now who are now running the country to the ground. But we had a good, the UNC especially had a good talent of leaders, all were white, and again, these are unsolved murders. Yes. Another thing that occurred to me is, because people ask me, why do you use journalists? This one is a drunk journalist, this one is a dead journalist. If you're writing detective stories, why not use detectives? And it took me a while to ponder that, and I realized we don't have a Sherlock Holmes in Sri Lanka. We don't have a Poirot coming there, smoking a pipe and cracking the case. Right. The murders don't get solved. The detective may come to cover it up rather than solve it, and it's the journalists who are going out there and risking their lives to try and find the truth and uncover it. So that's why these guys are the heroes, and that's why I'm fascinated by them. So for me, it was just trying to make sense of it. I don't know if I did, and that's why, and this is perhaps where the imagination comes in.
Yes.
I thought maybe there's a supernatural explanation for why we keep getting in trouble over and over again. Maybe there are all these restless spirits whispering these ideas in people's ears. So that was a lead that I thought, but the initial task was just to look at some of these unsolved murders and try and build narratives around them.
What a realm to take it to. But it's very interesting. See, I know Sri Lanka because I've been there, as you said. I've covered Sri Lanka over a period of time. I've interviewed a lot of their leaders who, many of them have fallen to bullets. But for someone who doesn't know Sri Lanka, this is as valid. That's what's interesting about your account. See, you don't need to know about the LTTE. I mean, you might have heard of it, or the JVP, or the Indian Occupation Force, or the demographic, shall we say, construct of Burghers, Muslims, Tamils, and so on. It's still, I think that's where your metaphoric use and your imagination and transcending the particular, making the particular universal is something that works so brilliantly well with this. Like with the great works like Marquez did it, or I would say, Bulgakov did it, or even Gunter Grass in the Tin Drum did it. But he's very, the pathos is very poignantly evoked. But at the same time, you need not have read the newspapers and known all about it in order to relate to it, to empathize with it. So that must have, of course, taken great imaginative power and knowledge of a situation. Although you say you lived in a bubble, it's impossible to get that sense of verisimilitude, even in an experiential sense. And it must also have meant a lot of hard work. So one of the things which is very striking about the book, I think, is the style, the language. Just the sheer pleasure of reading it, the way you use language. And I'm tempted to think that it comes to you intuitively like inspiration, like one of those things from the heaven that you're inhabiting in this book. But obviously, I know from what you've just told me as well that a lot of work and method went into this madness, if you like. You can tell us a little more about it.
So this idea of inspiration is something I've had to grapple with as a copywriter in advertising, right? If the client is coming on Thursday and on Wednesday you don't have an idea, you're either going to panic all night, but you have to manufacture something.
Yes.
You can't say, okay, I wasn't inspired, the muse wasn't speaking to me. You have to present something. And that forcing yourself to do that, there's a lot of pressure there, but you do it day in, day out. And I think when you're young, that pressure gets to you and you try all sorts of methods to kickstart your imagination. But I think one useful way of thinking of it was, for me, not thinking of yourself as the creator. The creator, I pull out my grip and I create a story and I breathe life into it. Because you think that, then the pressure's all on you. A more useful way is to think of the ideas floating and you're tuning your antennas, when we had transistor radios and you tune the frequency. And that idea is, so even when you're stuck, and I was stuck many, many times, suddenly, I've got this ghost, I don't know what he's doing, what does the afterlife look like, who killed him, I don't have answers to this when I started. I know some writers are architects who have the thing planned out, they know the ending before they begin. Sadly, that's not the kind of writer I am. I just have the situation and I paint myself in corners. But this idea that, okay, I don't know what's happening, I just need to tune my antenna to the right frequency. And what that means is, maybe I don't know enough. Maybe I need to read some more. Maybe my tone is not working, so I should read Marquez and Gunter Grass and Bulgakov, the masters, and do that. And so that you keep doing that, and then maybe tomorrow your antenna might pick up something. And so I think that was a good liberating way to think of it. That the book is already floating out there. You just need to wait for it to arrive and be patient. And so I think that's really how I set about it. But it was all problem solving.
Right.
Because at the beginning it's a simple murder mystery. You have a dead body and you have multiple suspects, JVP, LTT, the different parties. But then, okay, if a ghost is telling a story, what do ghosts look like? What do they do all day long when they're not wearing sheets and going, ooh, what are they doing with their day?
Yes.
Well, how does their landscape look? So I had to ask these questions and you don't have answers to them. But also sleep is a very good thing. I think I just did a power nap before we spoke. You saw that, right? That's my superpower. Usually when you're stuck, I think a good power nap or a long sleep, and suddenly you wake up and you picked up something. So I think that's a magic which we don't understand and maybe we shouldn't understand, but it certainly does work.
Shehan, what you say is very interesting. It seems to fall into place. You know how you're able to successfully carry a non-linear narrative, as it were. You know, it's not that there's not a conventional story arc here. There are so many things happening. They all feed into some kind of thing, and every page there are newer things being revealed. You know, it's a constant process of reveal, and then it's fascinating in its non-linear complexity as well, without being complex. You know? So, but you mentioned that you had no definite. I mean, you didn't want to. You were no tyrant in terms of the narrative that you were yourself evolving. That's very interesting because, you know, as I told you, when I read the book, it's also very visual. In fact, it's very evocative of a Fellini, as I say. But the filmmakers of that tradition, you know, they are all very possessive about the idea. That's why you call them autiers, right? The term used is autiers. So they want the idea to be totally in their control and to be understood as they have understood it and communicated. There's not enough scope. There's not great scope for anything being polysemic, you know, for people getting different meanings from the same text. Whereas in the written mode, in the creative mode, from the time, say, Roland Barthes said the birth of the reader is at the expense of the death of the author. You know, I mean, you write and then you're done with. You know, the reader then makes newer meanings you may not have meant, etc. Have you thought about how the imaginative process works? Why does it work like that in writing? Writing, one would think, is far more specific, far more definitive, unlike the celluloid form where, you know, images can give different kinds of impressions to different people. And yet writing seems to be more open-ended. You're able to read between the lines, the figures of speech, metonymy, metaphor. All of this pertains to writing rather than to the visual image, shall we say. I mean, just a thought.
Yeah, so I am a big fan of cinema, and for a long time my favorite place in Colombo, someone asked me to write a travel story about favorite places in Sri Lanka. They expected me to say Sikiri or Golford, and I said no, it's a little DVD store called Bollywood, which was a tiny little hole in the wall, which had, you know, Bollywood DVDs and Marvel movies and all that, but it had a little box in the corner. For 50 rupees you could get every movie by Fellini, Kurosawa, Bergman, Hitchcock, and while I was, you know, writing even Chinaman, that was my routine. I'd wake up early, write, struggle with the thing, work till midday, have lunch, and then watch a Hitchcock movie or a Fellini movie. And I don't know if now, when I was reading say Kurt Vonnegut or Salman Rushdie or Marquez, I'm consciously trying to gather what I can from their style. With cinema, you know, even when I did advertising, I wasn't a very hands-on, you know, I did TV commercials.
Yeah.
You get a lot of creatives who want to sit there with the eye in the camera. I was the one who I just send my script off and I'm like, just send me the film, I don't want to have anything to do with it.
Right.
And so I think that helped not understanding, because with cinema, you know, there's a lot of department, even though they have this auteur theory, you know, he or she manages the art department, the camera department, the actors, and there's a lot of moving parts to this, which somehow is mistaken for one person's vision. But I don't understand all that, maybe subconsciously, and then I have a good sleep and it comes through. But with writing, what I find is you discover it with every rewrite. So you write what you think is the story, and then you come back a week later and look at the same passage and go, wait, that thing is happening there, that character there sounds like he wants to have a bigger part. Maybe Maali, Almeida had something to do with him, and these are the magic moments where you realize that talking leopard, actually that guy could be the hero of the story, and I think that discovery is what keeps it fresh, and maybe that's why it's unexpected for you, so maybe it's surprising, and the reader is reading it in one sitting, not knowing that you have taken 8 months to finish this chapter again from here. So I think with writing, I mean, that's what I find, that you discover it each time, whereas perhaps with cinema, it's, you know, you're on a schedule, you the clock is ticking, the lights are on, and you have to kind of construct the image, and maybe you don't have that ability to go back and correct, though. Now with the technology, perhaps you can. But I mean, that's my stab at it. So it's good to consume art that you don't understand. Like you don't. When I read books now, I enjoy them as a reader would, but I'm also deconstructing. Okay, how did they do that? For instance, Agatha Christie, who is set the template for all the slasher, horror, the murder mystery, and so on. I heard that these stories may be apocryphal, but that she doesn't know who the murderer is until the first draft, then finds out who the murderer is, and then goes back and adds the little touches. And that's quite useful. I found that as well. Starting to discover characters not what they are, then you go back and see it. So for me, it's in the rewriting that you discover the book and the layers reveal themselves. Otherwise, I think you'll go mad if you had to carry all of this in your head. Yeah.
Very interesting. So I'm told that particularly when you're writing for the very competitive publishing industry, where agents and publishers play a very important role, editors for instance, how much does an editor, external editor, I mean, the creative idea, the genius is yours, you put it in some form, a draft form, whatever, and does it get changed dramatically by the editor, for good or for bad? How did it work in your case?
Is the draft or the final product that you send to say to your agent or editor, what's substantially there in the book, or did the editor's blue pencil or pen or whatever it is make a difference to it, and to what extent, in what sense did it play havoc with your creative imagination or metaphoric understanding of your plot and your theme?
But in both these cases, both these books were like 600 pages long when I had the first draft. So I tend to overwrite for whatever reason. I tend to digress and go all over and go to what. Because you're writing by instinct as well. I do have a plan, but you end up thinking, oh, these areas, maybe I'll do a page about the Sri Lankan flag or about suicide bombing, and I digress a lot. And certainly I owe a lot to both the editors, Chiki Sarkar for Chinaman and Natanya James for Seven Moons, because
It's fine.
I think there's a lot of treble on me and a lot of bass on you. Sorry, lost my train of thought.
No, editor, so you wrote 600 pages.
So I think that the thing about a great editor is you give it to a reader and they'll say, well, I was a bit bored here, I was a bit confused here, and I wasn't sure why you'd done this. I think an editor can say, those 50 pages, you can do that in 10. You don't need 50 pages to take the reader from here to there. In 10 pages you can do it, and they'll suggest how to do it. But of course, in the end, it's your name on the book, so you have to accept it, and they're always very polite and they're always very persuasive. And with Natanya, what she said is, because with Seven Moons, for instance, there's multiple moving parts to it. The murder mystery, the political thriller about the photographs under his bed, which will expose all the atrocities of Sri Lanka's war. There's afterlife vision. There's a number of angry ghosts talking. There's jokes. There's philosophy. And she just said, you can't confuse the reader too much. You need to be polite. You need to make sure that all the instruments aren't playing at once. And this was quite, so let's just take this bit here and move it to 100 pages later. That sort of surgery is very useful, and I don't think you can do it yourself. When I see Sri Lankan books, a lot of them suffer from a lack of a good editor. A lot of the locally published books, I think, when you see the ones that are published outside, obviously they've had professionals getting that manuscript in the place, but I feel that's something that could elevate Sri Lankan writing. But yeah, I think it's an essential process.
Right.
Because with both of them, but also you can push back. So, for instance, mainly I push back where they try to change the language. So now in China, when they say, the grammar is not quite right. But I said, that's how Sri Lankans speak. Machan, let's try put a drink. Put a drink is not particularly grammatical, but if the guy says, would you care to have a drink? It doesn't sound like the character. And so those are things I push back on. saying it has to sound like this guy is talking, and those were accepted. But I think most of the plot stuff, pacing stuff, and you're reluctant. I mean, even though I work in advertising, every time a client changes your copy, you die a bit, and you pretend like you're thick skin, but it breaks your heart a bit, and then you go and sulk, and then you come back and say, okay, let me see if I can work with this. And it's the same process with when the editor comes back saying, oh, it's terrific, but we just need to fix the beginning, make the ending work, and make sure the middle is not boring, but otherwise it's okay. And you have to take that and, what I realized is, each rewrite it gets better. And when you realize that and you trust your editor, you can, well, one means you can keep editing forever, which is what it felt like I was doing. I edited all through the pandemic, 2020 to 2022, until after a while, you're taking out a comma here, putting it back there, you're changing this word, then you realize, you know what, I think it's cooked.
Right.
But it takes a while to get to that stage, but I think it's invaluable.
So you might have felt pain when some of the wordage had to go because it's all your own creation, but ultimately it's for your own good, and you realize that, in terms of the work of the editor.
No, even the words now, there was the other request early on, I think with Chinaman, should we put a glossary?
Right.
And I find glossaries tiresome in fiction, and should we do footnotes? Again, it seems clumsy, and I said, no, let me write it better so that someone can get it from the context. Because we read the great Jewish novels in Philip Roth and Malibu, where there are these Yiddish words which we are expected to understand.
Right.
And you sort of do after a while. So things like that, I think I mainly push back on language, that it has to sound like a Sri Lankan book.
Yes.
And because that's the other thing, I think a lot of Sri Lankan books written in the 70s, 80s when I was growing up, it sounded, a lot of them were well written and so on, but it sounded like an Englishman was writing 100 years ago. That seemed to be like proper English used to sound like Somerset Maugham and so on. And I think, and I mentioned in the last session, people like Carl Muller really liberated us to say, no, you don't have to have your grammar right, talk like how Sri Lankan talks, and as long as the meaning is understood, it's fine. And so,
Well, we're going to open this out in another 2-3 minutes, but very quickly to move to the third part, which is truth. And Shehan started by saying that's more my realm. But honestly, no, I don't think journalism can ever arrive at truth. Journalism at best can give you facts, can give you information. Truth is really the realm of art, it's really the realm of creative expression. In fact, Plato famously said that poetry comes closer to vital truth than history. Because you can write reams and reams of history, but it's always the account of the narrator, of the winner, of the not of the loser, the battle. And it's in poetry, it's in a flash of shall we say epiphany for a sculptor or a painter or writers. The seed idea comes and then you develop it. So truth is, I wanted to raise the issue of truth in this day and time because we are living in a world where across the world democracy, there's a kind of jostling for truth that is going on under the surface. There are people who are trying to foist particular lies on. Lies seem to get better currency than truth.
Alternative facts, therefore.
Alternative facts, as you know, that's a euphemism, at least in the US context. But plain lies. Nietzsche famously said, that the history of truth is the history of the longest-lasting falsehood. And you can see that almost happening because there are authoritarian, sometimes proto-fascist regimes who are lying to the people, lying to their teeth day in and day out. In this part of the world, in various other parts of the world, where therefore creative expression actually captures the existential crisis far better. You find that happening in cinema, in some of the writings like yours, because they become more valuable in my view than journalism. Because journalism of the day is restricted and edged in by how much you can say of what, and you are having to look over your shoulders. It's infected by preemptive censorship, self-censorship, consequence of saying something and all of that, which is less problematic. And so truth therefore is really and fully and squarely in your lap actually, not so much in the journalistic lap.
Yes, so now this is a not a recent phenomenon, but it's certainly a 21st century phenomenon where we used to rely on the news, on the newspapers, on certain sources. But now I find, especially with my parents' generation, if they see something on WhatsApp and they see it enough times, you can't dispute it with them. They're like, well, no one's going to make it up and send it. I'm saying that's exactly what people are doing. Anyone can, anyone is the New York Times. You can write your report of an event and put it on whatever the medium is, give it a nice border, and you are up there with any journalist. And I guess for that generation, it's very difficult for them to fathom. Why would someone send me this? Obviously, this thing is true.
Yes.
But it's a curious thing for me because I worked in advertising, and in advertising, you're telling lies, but you're passing them off as true. You're pretending. Well, again, also you can use any euphemism, but this dream is not going to make you more attractive. This car is not going to turn you into a Bollywood star. But we kind of portray telling these things, but portray it as true. But fiction is the opposite. You're telling the reader this is a lie. None of this stuff ever happened. Leopards can't talk. As far as we know, aren't demons sitting behind us talking to us. So in this lie, but there might be some truth to this lie. And so I've often been aware of that contradiction. And for instance, if you take the Seven Moons, a lot of it, the whole vision of the afterlife, it's quite absurd and so on. The idea that the afterlife is like a bureaucracy. But for me, there seemed to be a ring of truth to it, which is why I was, what does the afterlife look like? And there's many visions in cinema. Again, Fellini's done a few afterlife visions, and in religion, in philosophy, there's many visions of it. But this vision of the afterlife as a disorganized bureaucracy where spirits are bumping into walls, not knowing where to go, that seemed a truism to me because that was, again, back to metaphor, a metaphor for the unresolved pain and the unresolved crimes of Sri Lanka's past, that these spirits were, and so even though it's a contrivance, for me it was getting to the center of that truth. And so when you're world building also, you need to make sure the rules, like, it really irritates me in these fantasy, magical realism, and again the line is blurred, I think. If you have a dragon in your book, is it fantasy or magical realism? I think if the dragon breathes fire, it's fantasy. If the dragon is a Marxist, then it's magical realism. And these are just categories. One type may win literary awards, the other one may get made into HBO series.
Yeah.
But for me, even though you're creating these worlds of ghosts and so on, you have to have some consistency to it.
Yes.
Because it does irritate me suddenly, or you're reading or watching a fantasy book and suddenly, now the guy can become invisible, but no one told me that.
True.
So for me it was really important to have the set of rules, so therefore, we've come a long way from truth, but it should feel true, it should feel consistent.
No, I think it feels vitally truthful. That's important. We talk about reality being stranger than fiction. Here is fiction being more truthful than reality. So it's a kind of obverse of that in some ways. Fascinating. Before just one last point, practical point, a couple of questions, curiosity points about the book. Now that the book is your Seven Moons of Maali Almeida has won the Booker, I'm sure it's being translated into different languages. Is Sinhala and or Tamil one of the languages that you know of that it's likely to be translated into? And what are the other languages in case European or other?
Yeah, so now my first book, Chinaman, I was trying to get it into different languages, and also Chinaman was moderately successful, nothing like this, I kept hitting a brick wall. They said, well, Italians don't like cricket. It's a cricket novel. Bulgarians don't like cricket. The Japanese don't like cricket. So try again next time. And I think it only came out in Sinhala, and that was also a project that I had to do. With this thing, it's been, something. My agent, who had never spoken to me for a year, is my best friend, calls me every morning, and it's, I think, 26 languages. So, Brazil, Russia, China. Chinaman is coming out in China.
China now.
Yes, but it's not going to be called that for obvious reasons. But Sinhala and Tamil are the languages that I'm getting involved in. And so we're about to close a deal for Sinhala. We're still looking for the... no, I think we've done the Tamil as well. So yeah, that's very important to me that, I mean, I just think for Sri Lanka in general, that the works are in translation and Sinhala and Tamil literature is translated in English because we still are in these silos. But yeah, it's a bit strange. Now this thing is going to be read in Estonia and Latvia, and this is not something you imagine when you're sitting in Colombo typing about this war that people have forgotten about. But I'm very grateful for that.
That speaks to the universal quality of the book as well, in terms of the languages. Well, we are going to open this up for questions, and we'll elaborate on some of these points in the context of your questions. Go ahead. Please make sure you have the microphone before you speak. It's coming to you.
Hi, sir. So speaking about the Booker Prize, in India we have 4 Booker Prize winners. One is Kiran Desai, Arundhati Roy, Aravind Adiga, and Salman Rushdie. And out of the 4 Booker Prize winning novels, 2 have been made into a very popular films. So one is Deepa Mehta's Midnight Children, and then the White Tiger was again serialized into a Netflix movie. So how was it there, like a book winning a prize? Will it be standing a chance of making it into a movie? Have you been approached by movie makers? Are you planning to give it into the movie world? Because Arundhati Roy said a strict no. She is against making God of Small Things into a movie. So what is your take on taking that particular award-winning work being made into a movie?
Oh, I wasn't aware about this about Arundhati because God of Small Things would make a fantastic movie. I'm sure we all think. With films, we all love cinema. I don't get excited about films because it's so heartbreaking. Chinaman has been, numerous people have said, yeah, we're going to make this into a film. It's been optioned a couple of times, and yeah, nothing has happened because look, there's a lot of moving parts to this thing as well. So yeah, with this, there's certainly, now I have a film agent and all that, and they keep calling me with these big names saying, okay, this studio is reading it, that actor is interested in it, and so on. Of course, I would love a film to be made. I think I wouldn't like to be involved. That's one thing. I mean, I think with Midnight Children, Salman Rushdie was involved. I don't think Adiga was that involved with White Tiger. I prefer that route. But yeah, I don't. So there's talk. Is the short answer. They're talking to film producers but yeah, nothing has in concrete yet, and I'm not going to get excited until it's in the cinema and out there because who knows, these things can be in development hell for many years. But no, I would certainly, I think both of the books would be challenging to be made into films, but I think it can be done. But yeah, I don't know if I'm the guy to do it. I've been rewriting these things about 8-9 times. Doing the screenplay again would be, that would be another version of hell for me. But yeah, I'm hopeful. Let's see.
Also, it's early days yet. I'm sure. The book is just off the, off the flame, as it were. So I'm sure there will be a big demand. And I suspect it has to have someone like Fellini's imagination to make this a true celluloid version of this.
But another point is, do you use a South Asian director or now? I think White Tiger was a great example. That was an American director. And the view of India was like, that movie, I don't know if it did much business or anything, but for me it was a very unique view of India. It captured that sort of dirty, dusty, the reality of India. So that's another debate. Do we get a local director or do we get someone with a different eye? So yeah, lots of questions to be asked. But yeah, I'd like to see that film.
Go ahead.
Hi sir, we have met in Kerala Legislature Book Festival. And
yeah, you got far from Trivandrum.
Yeah. So my question is, yesterday I asked this question to Mr. Vivek sir, who is a Kannada writer, and he was talking about how a language has its own meanings to convey, and certain meanings that is only confined to a language. So in my scenario, I am coming from Lakshadweep, Minikoy Island. which, there my mother tongue is Divehi language, which is similar to Sinhalese language. So I wanted to ask you this question about that. So you are coming from Sri Lanka, you might be talking, or your mother tongue might be different language, and then you write in English. So I wanted to ask you if meanings get lost when you are from a place and then you don't write in your native language, but then you write in English language.
Yes, in my case, and I guess the case of a lot of Colombo middle class writers, even though I speak Sinhala, I read Sinhala, I can read the newspapers, English, I don't think I could write a novel in Sinhala. And in Tamil, I just started learning language. I'm certainly a long way from, if I could read a novel in Tamil, I think that would be an achievement. So it wasn't a choice for me. So if you're talking about mother tongue, I mean, it's weird to say English is your mother tongue, but English is the language that I read in and perhaps I think in and I imagine in. But one thing I did notice with translations, my first book, Chinaman, when it was translated into Sinhala, a lot of people say the Sinhala versions are a lot better. And I sort of joked that this guy wrote the Sinhala version first and then I traveled back in time and I translated his. Because the Sinhala Chinaman, the voice is much cruder, much more authentic, and it's a real drunken sports writer. And it's a very different experience. And I read the Sinhala Chinaman, it was almost like reading a new book, even though and I think that is the nuance of language, that WG in my version is a bit more sort of erudite and witty, whereas this guy was a bit, I would say, funnier and more authentic. And so, and I'm very interested to see what the same translator does with Seven Moons. So certainly, I mean, I think there's much more qualified people to talk about what language does to your brain, and how the craft of storytelling changes depending on the tools and the words and the languages you're using. So I think that's certainly the case, but for me it wasn't a choice. English was what I wrote in, but I'm interested to see how it comes out in Sinhala Tamil. I suspect they will be very different books, even though they are ostensibly the same book. I think totally they'll be very different.
Yes.
Hello sir, good evening sir. So it's very fascinating to know the narration patterns that you involved while writing this novel, especially because it involved magical realism and the perspective of ghost and all. So my question is, when was the decision taken to write this novel in second person? Because we don't often see novels being written on second person. It's a very difficult thing to do. Was it advantageous for you to write like that because it involves all this magical realism and all, and to say it from a bird's eye perspective? And at which point was the decision made? Because you said your process is very organic, like the drafts keep on building it on itself. So was it an early decision or was it a late decision, and how this helped you to build this story?
Yeah, no, it wasn't. That's a good question. It wasn't an early decision at all. I write all the books in the third person. The first draft is always in the third person. Chinaman was in the third person. It was a biography of this cricketer, and you struggle with it when you find after 50 pages it's a bit of a drudge to write. You wonder why that is, and I think with Chinaman the decision was maybe because I was interviewing a lot of different people who knew Pradeep Mathew, and the drunk journalist was the most interesting voice for me, and then I thought, why not take that guy and let him tell the whole story, and then the words and the pages started flowing. With this one, again, I wrote it in a third person. It was chats with the dead, interviews of different hosts and so on. But then, when I realized it was going to be only about Maali Almeida, it was going to be his story, I had a few technical issues. So usually your hero, you describe them physically and have them in a situation. This is a disembodied voice, so there's no body to describe. And I was like, what does a disembodied voice sound like? And I grappled with it. What does a ghost experience and so on? And then I thought, perhaps perhaps if anything survives the death of your body, it's the voice in your head. And whatever that is, the voice, and there's a reading in the book, what is the voice in your head? Is it your voice? Is it the voice of your soul? Is it the voice of your previous births and so on? The voice in my head, and I don't know what other people's heads are like, but the voice in my head is in the second person. And I don't know, I'm trying to interrogate the voice in your head. For me, it's always someone who say, okay, it's almost 6, you can wrap up. It's like someone, like a coach telling me what to do. And this was, firstly, it made sense to me, but also it's in the writing. When I started writing, again it started flowing. And then later I thought, okay, so who is this Jew who is telling the story? Is it Maali Almeida or is it something different? Is it like a different incarnation of him? And I think the book discusses that as well. But interestingly, when the audio book was done, the voice actor, Shehan Karunatilaka, a very talented young man, did a terrific job with it. He let it slide. When he was reading the narrative Jew, it was a slightly different voice to when he was Maali Almeida's memories. So the Maali Almeida in the flashbacks has a slightly different register to the Jew telling the story. Almost saying that the Jew telling the story is not quite Maali Almeida. It's a different. So all this stuff came much later. But for me, it made sense. This is the voice in his head, and it's telling him things, and it's not always reliable. And sometimes through the book, he's questioning. Who's the voice in my head? Where are my thoughts coming from? Is it coming from me or is some other spirit whispering these things in my ear? But I think the main thing is because, second person, it could work in a short story. There have been a few examples of novels, Bright Lights, Big City, where it works. But it was a challenge, but I think it just seemed to flow and the pages kept turning, so I stuck with it. And I think it works. I hope it works. But
We have time for maybe 2 more questions. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. So what is your take on writers becoming actors? Like, I believe writing itself is a political art. So your take on that?
Did you get the question? What's your take on?
Writers becoming actors, like using the medium of art to express our political views. Or for example, taking instance of Salman Rushdie's novel.
Right. Writers expressing their political views through writing, right? Is that what you mean?
writers and
activism. Activism.
Do they have the added responsibility of becoming a activist?
Personally, I don't think so. I think a writer should write what the hell he or she wants. If they choose to express activism, express a political view, that's fine. But I don't think there's obligation for every writer to be there. And certainly myself, I try and shrug that off. Everywhere I go, I get asked about politics, and I'm like, no, I'm writing silly detective stories about ghosts and drunks. That's my gig. And maybe there's politics in it. But I stay away from expressing my own views because I have my political views, but I don't think the book is the place for me. Now, obviously, there's a whole spectrum. There's many writers who wish to deliver a message, who are passionate about something and want to express that through narrative. And I think that's fine, but I think automatically think that writers are qualified to be activists. I think that's a misnomer. And we're seeing currently, there's a lot of activism in Sri Lanka, and there's a lot of writers, and sometimes those two intersect. But I don't think it necessarily has to. I think a writer should accept whatever mantle they wish to and not be pushed in any direction. And so, personally, I don't accept that as my, people say, I get called for all these courses, and I'm like, leave me alone, I just want to sit in my room and talk to myself. That's what I do. But of course, there's room. There's room to be whatever type of writer you want, however politically engaged you wish to be.
Yes, go ahead.
So my question is sort of connected to the previous question that was raised. So in Kerala, there's a kind of culture where you're judged if you don't read non-fiction or if the fiction that you consume is not political. So my question to you is, as a reader, why should you read? Should you read to develop political opinions or to learn about things? Or should people be judged, or should there be an elitist circle surrounding readers? And again, what constitutes as good writing to you?
Wow, that's a lot. Who is doing this judging? Show them to me. I don't think anyone should judge you for what you're reading. You can and should prescribe what good reading and good writing is. I think firstly we read, and all of us, definitely myself, I read for pleasure. I read the stuff that not necessarily going to educate me, but I read for enjoyment. And then, but I also read about 5 or 6 books at the same time. So I'll read like a good trashy thriller, but I'll also read a classic, and I'll also read maybe some non-fiction to kind of, you eat your meat and your potatoes and your vegetables, so you have a balanced reading diet. But for me, the purpose of reading is simply, again back to the voice in your head. You live with the voice in your head, and that's all you know. And reading, and certainly cinema and all types of art, but definitely reading, allows you to get in someone else's head. And that person may be someone who lived centuries ago, who lives on the other side of the planet, someone who's no longer with us. But I think that is the real magic of it, that for however long it takes you engaging with that book, you are out of your stupid little thoughts and you are in someone else's head. And I think that is the joy of reading, and you get to choose which head you want to be in. And don't let anyone judge you for which head you want to be in, but I think that's so experiencing different points of view. Now, if you choose to be more politically aware or to explore subject, that's your choice. But if you just choose to just do it for escapism, I don't think there's anything wrong in that. So for me, it's as simple as that. The writer is trying to give another person who knows nothing about them or their country or their subject, to give that person an experience. And I think for me, that's how I measure my own books and good books. If someone who knows nothing about Sri Lanka or cricket or LTT picks up the book and has an experience on the other side of the world, then the book is successful, regardless of how many prizes or how many units is said. If you can do that, then you've written a successful book. And I think really that's all there is to it.
Thank you. So I think we'll have to leave it there. It's been a great pleasure for me personally, and I'm sure it's been for you as well, to hear the Shehan Karunatilaka, the winner of the Booker this year, for what I think is a book that is going to continue to be spoken about, discussed, debated for months to come. And it certainly is I think, a trailblazing book from this part of the world. So we can, I think, legitimately take some pride that in a neighboring country very close to us, we have a Booker winner. Thank you very much, Shehan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.